Hello, Husker fans. Nebraska football has its new head coach, announcing Matt Rhule first thing Saturday morning following a Black Friday win over Iowa. And we're here to talk about it, offer our quick reactions. I am Hail Varsity Managing Editor Brandon Vogel. I am joined by staff writer Brady Oltmans. Brady, how are you?
I'm doing well. We'll see how this goes. I got into my apartment about 2 a.m. this morning and rolled out of bed shortly thereafter. So let's see how this works out.
Yeah, that was. How was your Iowa City layover?
It was nice. I do. This might not go over well with Husker fans, but I like Iowa City a lot. I think it's a cool place, a cool Big Ten town. The stadium's really cool. Obviously, the pageantry that they have with the hospital and the tradition with the wave after the first quarter. I just think it's a really cool stadium and a cool game day to be a part of. I think at least Husker fans can concede that for the amount of people that were there yesterday. Um, it's just a really cool place to be, and I enjoy being there. The ride back gets a little stiff, and then by 2 a.m. I was ready for bed.
Yeah, I did that there and back drive when Pelini was still the coach. I remember writing a column about Rex Burkhead in the car back. So how it tends to go with the timing for that, though, it's easier for I think Husker fans to concede some qualities to Iowa coming off. Once you snap a 7-game losing streak, makes that a little bit easier to do. But we're here to talk about the new era of Nebraska, which I guess is officially underway. Athletic Director Trev Alberts announced the hire this morning. Matt Rhule comes to Nebraska off of a stint in the NFL, was at Carolina for 2 full seasons, was fired 5 games into this season. But that's not why Nebraska was interested in him. It was more his 7 seasons in the college game. He was at Temple for 4 years, starting in 2013, went 2-10, then 6-6, 10-4, 10-3, winning an AAC conference title in 2016. Then he moved to Baylor, was there for 3 seasons, 1-11, 7-6, 11-3. Pretty nice and neat trajectory there. I think the trajectory everyone hopes for. Maybe not the 2-10 and 1-11 start, but we'll get into that maybe a little bit later. I will read the statement Nebraska sent out from Rhule just to get that on the record here. Quote, "It's a tremendous honor to be chosen to lead the Nebraska football program," Rhule said. "When you think of a great tradition-rich program in college football, Nebraska's right at the top of the list. The fan base is second to none, and I consider it a privilege to have the opportunity to coach in Memorial Stadium on Tom Osborne Field. My family and I are so grateful to become a part of the Husker family, and we can't wait to get started." Appreciate that he got a Tom Osborne Field reference in there. Backed up some of those sentiments in a quick spot on College Game Day, which you can read about on hailvarsity.com right now. But Brady, I guess your gut reaction to this hire as a hire itself.
I think it's really difficult to say that Trev got his guy, but this is about as close as you could get. With the way that things went down last year in the coaching cycle, I think that really flipped college football on its head and changed how we look at things like this from forever on. With Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly leaving premier jobs for other premier jobs, and I think that kind of what we saw unfold in the coaching carousel this year with different coaches getting different extensions. I think with schools' reactions to that, the moment that their head coach was linked to a different job, they moved fast to make sure that, hey, we want to keep this person as long as possible. And if we can't, we want to make sure that we get, a little money on the back end or make it difficult for someone to leave. Having said that, Matt Rhule has a long history of success in college football. I think the 1-win seasons are kind of difficult for a lot of fans to swallow off the beaten or right off rip. But Temple is traditionally not a powerhouse, and Baylor, at the time that he was hired, was in about as tough a position as you could ask a coach to step into. So knowing that he did the best with what he could, got it turned around and moved forward. I don't think I'm outlandish in saying that Nebraska's in a better position now than Temple or Baylor was at the time that he arrived there. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does. He is a known program builder, program rehabilitator, and in his spot on ESPN, strictly mentioned the line and being a tough line. And I think that That's something a lot of Husker fans can relate to and see as a good point to start.
Yeah, he's, I like this part of college football. I like, playing fantasy AD where like if you're the AD at Tulsa, who do you go get? Like I just enjoy that piece of it. I dig into things. I maybe dig into things too much at times. And rules, and I wrote about this, way back in October, I think, when right after he had been fired at Carolina, because his name was going to be attached to, I think, any Power Five college football opening. He had the ability, he had the financial freedom to be choosy, but he also had a track record that told you it's probably not going to be Arizona State. No disrespect to the Sun Devils, but you needed something like an Auburn or Nebraska, and like I said, the trajectory at his two stops is about as clean as you'll find. That's kind of exactly the way it's supposed to go. And I think it's really hard to make coaching hires, and there are so few sure things. Like Lincoln Riley to USC is outside the norm. That's like a once every 5 years hire, except maybe Brian Kelly ended up being that too, although a lot of people question the fit there. So there's kind of no guarantees with any of this stuff, but the praise from the media, I will say, and I mean national media specifically, has been kind of universal early on. And of course, you're going to have people who are disappointed. They'll look at a career 47-43 record and say, "Well, hold on," and you really kind of got to get in there and read between the lines. As far as I think you put it well. I don't know if Trev got his guy, because I don't know if there was a his guy in my view. I mean, you had a long time to conduct the search. You had a lot of names that were out there, and just seeing the number of guys who got extensions in the last week told you that if it wasn't Nebraska, somebody was interested in those coaches. Talking specifically about a Mark Stoops, Lance Leipold, Kalen DeBoer, all coaches that I think would have been good hires for Nebraska or for anybody else as well. You've been working the phones hard over the past couple of weeks, including yesterday in the press box at Iowa. What were you able to learn from any of your conversations about how this came together?
Well, I think the reoccurring thought was that Matt Rhule was the guy that could kind of pick his spot. Initially, I think when Trev Alberts made contact, or when the two parties kind of talked over the phone, there was mutual interest. Obviously, Matt discussed it on his game day spot that he revered Nebraska growing up, and that that's one of the programs that really stood out to him. So he was clearly interested at the time. It seemed like there was a gap and a hurdle in the way, most of it to deal with the Carolina Panthers contract and the buyout and just the logistical issues that deal with that. And I think at that time, to my understanding and through my conversations with people, it was Trev and the university kind of regrouping themselves and determining, okay, well, how hard do we want to pursue this? Should we look elsewhere in case we can't figure out a way to clear these hurdles and get over that? And I think that's when you kind of saw outlets kind of drop Rhule's name off to the side in favor of for others, because they were still reaching out to people, kind of gauging interest, maybe conducting interviews. And then in the end, I think it became apparent that Matt Rhule was the best option available. And I think Nebraska maybe took a moral inventory and said, what do we have? How much do we want to pay? How much do we want to hit the bargaining table with? And in the end, they were able to get something done. I'm not sure how serious other candidates were, but I know that it wasn't like it was Matt Rhule or nothing. Nebraska had kind of a list of different names at the end that they wanted to go to. And then that's why Monday you saw Stoops, Leipold, DeBoer have all of these extensions, is basically with those names fell off the table. And then Nebraska got serious. We need to approach this. So it's been a long time coming, a long time in the works, like you said, but I think that's because there was no slam dunk hire. There was no obvious candidate and obvious choice. And that's what made reporting on this and digging on this all the more frustrating. But in the end, I think the name that kept being floated out and the name that kept being regurgitated by agents and people around the industry and in college football was Rhule, Rhule, Rhule. And I think now when all the pieces fall into place, it kind of makes sense why that was.
Yeah, when Trev made the decision to move on from Scott Frost on September 11th, he talked about the value for his perspective of having a lot of runway here. And I think the result that we learned today kind of backs that up from a reporting perspective. Didn't make it the funnest because it was just so easy to, there wasn't that sense of urgency. Things weren't like happening rapidly. They kind of unfolded over that entire time span, and worked for Nebraska. I think they, you know, as this thing took all the twists and turns, there were moments where I thought like maybe Nebraska is kind of striking out with some of these candidates. The fact that it is Rhule, I think, kind of alleviates that worry in my mind, because, like you said, he is somebody who not only probably had his pick of jobs in this cycle, maybe not Auburn. Pete Thamel of ESPN was reporting earlier this morning that it looks like Hugh Freeze is now the leader there, which is interesting. But Matt Rhule, not only could he have picked almost any job that's open now or would open, but he could also just wait. And, I haven't seen his Carolina contract specifically. Most of those NFL contracts, and it's not that different in college, but include a mitigation clause, which you alluded to. They owe him $40 million. I'm not sure what the time frame is on that, but basically every dollar Nebraska pays him is a dollar Carolina won't have to. And there's also legal language about how, if Matt Rhule takes another job, it needs to be at fair market value. And it sounds like maybe that's where some of the I don't want to say haggling, but just saying negotiations, I guess, were around what that would be. And we don't know officially yet what the terms of the contract. We had been hearing somewhere in the $7 million per year range, which feels like about market value. Crazy as that may sound in today's college football. I mean, your last head coach was at 5. You weren't gonna, unless the event of keeping Mickey Joseph and giving him the full-time role, like you weren't gonna be cheaper than Scott Frost. On that note, a lot of Husker fans will still be plenty invested in what happens now with Mickey Joseph. We'll of course start digging into where Matt Rhule has been from a staffing perspective, where he might go. There's so much to dig into now that we just know who's at the top of the football food chain. But what do you expect from these coming days? He'll be officially announced on Monday at a press conference in Lincoln. But what do you think are the big pieces from now through really the next couple of weeks?
Well, it starts with the press conference, saying the right things, meeting the media, because Nebraska's local media is pretty significant, and national media will be there as well. He did kind of allude to in his brief college game day segment. I assume he filmed from Cape May, where he was at. He credited Mickey Joseph in his coaching abilities and what he did in the interim. There is legal language in Mickey's amended contract that he got when he became interim head coach that if another head coach becomes permanent, he would revert back to wide receivers coach and associate head coach. Now, that's not uncommon. That's kind of par for the course, but it is a little uncommon that it goes in writing and as part of the contract. Now, having said that, Mickey's also been around the block a time or two in college football, and he alluded to yesterday that, hey, it's up to the new head coach to pick their staff. It's fair to them. But Mickey's also made himself incredibly valuable to not only Nebraska, but I think to the next coach. So he's in kind of a limbo area, just in the sense that obviously there's been no Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule announces, Mickey Joseph on his staff, but Mickey kind of said yesterday afterwards that while he enjoys the college football day on the couch, he's going to be supportive of the assistant coaches and the people he worked with at Nebraska who haven't gone through this before. And I think that that's a testament to who Mickey is. I think we've got a story up on Mickey and what's next, maybe a half hour before the news broke about Matt Rhule. But for me, it's going to be coordinators first. Matt Rhule does have a very loyal group of coaches that kind of followed him both from Temple to Baylor and then to Carolina. I know that some people say he rubs people the wrong way, but he has a very loyal group of following. He might be a polarizing figure in that way, but you can't please everybody all the time. And I think he's got a personality I think a lot of Husker fans can relate to. He reveres the job, likes it, and I think that that's something fans can rally behind. The coaching staff is going to be the big one, and then obviously who on the coaching staff comes in to get recruits, players, keeps the transfer portal or draft declarations to a minimum in order to get that staff and personnel retention like Mickey Joseph has harped on. Now, having said that, Trey Palmer this morning declared for the NFL draft. Now, single season Nebraska receiving records, single game receiving records holder for Nebraska after the season he had. You can live with that departure. You really want him back, but you throw your hands up and say there's nothing more we can do. Isaiah Garcia Castaneda declared for the transfer portal just before the deadline after Scott Frost's dismissal. And those are really the two knowns right now. There have been some tweets that got deleted and some, eager mentions, but and there are some that we think that are leaning towards coming back but haven't announced their intentions yet. So I mean, all of this is in play. Plus, you got to nail down the recruiting staff for the portal and your 2023 recruiting class. So, congratulations, Matt Rhule. Welcome to Nebraska. You're coming from Cape May. Hope you got your running shoes on because you got a lot of work to do in these next couple weeks.
Yeah, it's gonna be a whirlwind. I mean, there's Nebraska. Just I think based on location, the fact that it recruits nationally has always been a place that had a high attrition rate based on what I've been able to research into that. Then you added the transfer portal on top of that, which made it even easier. And then you just always are going to have turnover around a coaching change. So there's going to be plenty to keep up on in the days and weeks ahead. It's going to be a furious finish to the year 2022 once you figure recruiting, once the portal opens up again, and then early signing period in later December. So we'll make sure to have everyone covered on that front. There'll be a lot coming from us in the days ahead. But Matt Rhule, Nebraska's 31st head coach, a Penn State walk-on, East Coast guy. It's going to be an interesting fit in some regards, but you kind of can't argue, I think, from my perspective, with the connections he's been able to build with players. And I think we saw over these recent weeks with Mickey Joseph how valuable that can be. I kind of, on the radio this morning, I termed him as he builds these programs at a pretty human level, like X's and O's and scheme and recruiting and all of that stuff's great. And it's important, and making good coaching hires is important as he fills out his staff. But you got to connect with kids, and you got to build a team. And I think when you look at his college trajectory, the results are there. We just haven't seen him in long term at a place yet. 4 years at Temple, three at Baylor, and then off to the NFL. So that'll be an interesting thing. Anything else on your end, Brady, you wanted to hit on as Nebraska launches into its new era?
Not especially. But like you kind of alluded to and mentioned, he's the Nebraska hurdle with recruiting and player retention, getting people in. I think a lot of agents I talked to said that's not an issue, but that is a logistical problem that each coach is going to, or the potential new hire is going to have to deal with. Now Matt Rhule is going to have to do that. But when he got people into Baylor, there was a lot of hurdles there. I mean, he inherited a draft class with just one known recruit and one pledge commit that didn't decommit, and he ended up being like an All-American and NFL draft pick. And getting players to come to Philly and Temple. I mean, Temple's not a big football powerhouse, but he was able to do that. He's from Big Ten country in the Northeast now. Like you said, former walk-on at Penn State. He's coached down in Texas, and now he has NFL experience in the Carolinas. So his recruiting footprint and his connections kind of span everywhere. One thing that he did do very well is build connections with high school coaches and people. Joey McGuire, now at UTSA, was on his staff at Baylor, and Joey is notorious in the college football circles for having close ties to high school football in Texas and well-built connections with the recruiting base in the South. So if Nebraska has logistical recruiting hurdles, Mickey Joseph and Matt Rhule are two names that could maybe clear that with a couple of inches to spare. So it'll be curious to see how that all turns out.
Yeah, that was one of the big questions, is kind of one of the bullet points of the legend of Matt Rhule is, he took a lot of that Temple staff, a lot of East Coast guys down to Waco, Texas. And, if there was hesitation then about that hire, it was probably that. It was probably the fit and just how foreign that was. And he made some strategic hires to address that and shore that up. And it worked. We'll see what happens. In addition to the job, I think that Mickey Joseph did during his interim stint, like really appreciate just how professionally he handled this. Like he knows, he's done this long enough to say, hey, like I get it. If if the new guy comes in and they're like, sorry, it's not the fit, or I've got a guy. No hard feelings there, I think, but because of that Baylor history and what happened there, I think someone like Matt Rhule probably gives Mickey Joseph the best chance of being in Lincoln for more than the season. That's just my read on it. Not reporting that, pure opinion on my part, but we'll see what happens. There's going to be a lot that happens in the days ahead. Make sure you're following Hail Varsity on all of our various social channels, and even better, due to the timing of this, we still have our Black Friday / Cyber Monday / holiday extravaganza deal going. It's going to be the cheapest price on an annual subscription for Hail Varsity that you see all year. So if you want details on that, check out hailvarsity.com. And there'll be plenty of stories coming there. So make sure you get subscribed and have access to all of that. Brady, thanks for hopping on with me, and we'll go get back to work.
Yay.